All right, I think it's 12 o'clock. Let's go. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today for this brief presentation sponsored by our friends at Solmedics. I'm Jamie Falash.
And I'm Megan Solo.
And we're here to make sure that you have all of the information you need, the tools and the resources to get and stay compliant with the EPA's dental rule, which is now in effect and being enforced. The aim of our live presentation today is to update you and your staff on the elements of the EPA Dental Rule 40 CFR 441 that require dental practices to comply no later than July 14th of this year, including details on the October 12th deadline for your one-time compliance report. We'll talk about what led to the need for the rule, as well as the ADA's recommendations for best management practices, or BMPs, and dental wastewater's impact as it moves into and through our environment.
Thank you, Jamie. Since there are exceptions to every rule, we'll walk through exactly who is exempt and why, what you'll need to document, as well as what you need to get into compliance if you haven't already, including all record keeping, required documentation, and who's going to need copies. At the end of the presentation, we'll provide links to resources for everything from the rule itself to the details around what's included in your one-time compliance report that was due on October 12th, just a few weeks ago.
Finally, we'll allow time for a little Q&A at the end so we can address questions from the audience. Megan, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie. The best place to start is how we got here, which is just a little bit of history. In the early 90s, Europe and Canada started to bring awareness to managing amalgam and mercury in wastewater, which led to the development of the first amalgam separators. However, they weren't compatible with practices here in the United States. So not long after, in the early 2000s, the first amalgam separators were introduced here in the United States in dental practices. Since 2003, the ADA has published best management practices for amalgam waste. This version and the current version provide information to outline the management and recycling of dental amalgam waste in order to protect the environment.
So let's fast forward to 2014 when the ADA proposes a rule in support of removal and recycling of mercury from wastewater into our municipal sources. It then shares those best management practices to help establish regulations later issued as a final rule by the EPA on July 14th of 2017. The new dental rule gave practices 3 years to comply. The rule lays out standards to reduce mercury from dental offices into publicly owned treatment works, or POTWs, supporting evidence that dental offices are the largest contributor of mercury in our wastewater. So we know that July 14th of 2020 was the deadline for the rule 3 years prior, but another deadline was set forth within the rule, but only as it pertains to submission of a one-time compliance report. And that report was due no later than October 12th of this year. We'll get into the details of that report, where to submit it, and how it relates to your record keeping a little bit later.
So what exactly is the dental rule? Let's define it. Under the Code of Federal Regulations, all non-exempt dental practices were required to install a certified amalgam separator with a removal rate of 95% and provide proof or certification of this. Anytime new regulations or SOPs or best practices are required, it's important to talk about the why. Keeping in mind, let's begin with a little bit of dental materials recap and history around how the dental rule came to be.
All right, I think it's fair to say that there are a number of reasons the new regulation has been put into place. So we'll break them down into two parts. The first is the source of the problem, and the second is how it impacts us all. First, let's start with amalgam composition. It's no mystery, most of us here today, that amalgam is made up of two equal parts, I should say. However, we realize that many additional office staff are joining us here today who may or may not be aware of this, so we want to quickly break that down. The first half of amalgam is a powdered mix containing silver, tin, copper, zinc, and other metals, and the second half is liquid mercury. When they're mixed together and used properly, it creates a restorative material widely recognized as safe as long as it's in its solid state, and one that we've been using successfully for over 125 years.
So why the concern? The issue with amalgam comes into play when the material is placed as a restoration, and even more when it's removed. In both events, it's introduced into our environment and our municipal water facilities. In part 2, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the environmental impact of mercury's path and what brought this new regulation about.
So once that amalgam filling is removed from the patient's mouth, it's no longer in a solid state. And keeping in mind that flakes of amalgam can enter our suction systems when the filling is placed as well. From there, it travels through our vacuum systems and out to our municipal sources, where it often remains in sludge or other solid material left after our wastewater is treated. It then makes its way further into the environment through landfilling and incineration, and then it can be released into our aquatic environments, where when it's combined with certain bacteria, it converts to highly toxic methylmercury that bioaccumulates in fish and shellfish, which is the main source of methylmercury exposure to humans. We know that exposure to methylmercury causes certain conditions like ALS, Alzheimer's, and fertility issues. So how do we control this? We begin by managing it at the source in a common sense, economically sound way. And we start at the dental office. By separating amalgam out before it hits our water sources, we greatly reduce the negative impact potential on our health and the environment. Amalgam separation is the most cost-effective means of reducing mercury in the environment, and other measures would involve cleanup after damage is already done, and it would call for expensive mitigation on a massive scale.
Amalgam separators offer an economical means to capture that amalgam. They're an easy solution to capture that mercury where it's concentrated and where it can be recycled. The EPA estimates that compliance with the final rule will actually reduce the amount of metals entering our PTOWs, about half of which is mercury, by at least 10.2 tons per year. So now 2 questions come to mind. Are you exempt, and are you compliant as it specifies in the rule?
Now we know that the rule covers non-exempt practices, so let's explore exactly who is exempt. Offices that are exempt are those that are not considered significant industrial users under the rule, and they don't place or remove amalgam fillings. Those that are exempt are offices where the practice of dentistry consists exclusively, and that's a really deliberate word they placed in section 403 of the rule. So where the practice of dentistry consists exclusively of the following specialties: oral pathology, prosthodontics, radiology, oral surgery, orthodontics, and periodontics. These specialty offices and mobile units fall under the exemption, as they only place or remove amalgam on a limited, unplanned, or emergency basis, and sometimes not at all.
A few important notes on specialty-focused practices. Prosthodontists that remove amalgam are not exempt, nor are periodontists. This has been a point of confusion, as many other specialties do fall under the exemption rules. Mobile units and providers that do not discharge wastewater into a PTOW, instead they collect that water in a wastewater tank, for example, for transfer to a centralized waste treatment facility, are exempt under the rule.
So all of them, whether they're exempt or not exempt, you all still have to file a certification as to your status with a one-time compliance report. The report submitted by the exempt practice is going to look a little different than the one submitted by the non-exempt practice, and you only have to submit that once, so long as the focus or specialty of your practice doesn't change. So essentially, those exempt are certifying that they are in fact exempt by the nature of their specialty, their practice, and the terms of the rule found in section 441.1 if you want to check that out, but we've covered those details here today.
A few additional points to call out here. The final rule does not apply to dental practices that discharge into septic systems. However, while the rule exempts those offices that are on septic systems and mobile units, that waste from those 2 types of practices does go somewhere. Most septic companies ultimately discharge that pump sludge into wastewater treatment plants. Therefore, you may still be required to follow the proper disposal methods. Also, wastewater treatment plants may have their own restrictions on waste that it will accept, and it may not take wastewater that could contain amalgam. Protect your practice by knowing where that pumped material is going and discharge waste is going. It's recommended that you contact your local wastewater treatment plant to discuss any restrictions and how they impact your practice. If they have restrictions, then installing an amalgam separator would be an appropriate solution. Some septic companies do treat their own wastewater. Make certain that you cover yourself and your practice by asking for that documentation from your pumping company. Either way, you want to have written proof of proper disposal.
Again, it's always just best to check with your local wastewater utility, your state agency, or EPA office to protect yourself and to make sure that you're filing that one-time compliance report accurately. If you're ever confused about the process or what you need, you can call your amalgam separator company or Solmedics and they'll guide you through it. All right, so how do you know if you're really in compliance? How can you be sure? Let's define the 4 steps to get you where you need to be and well prepared in terms of proper operation and free of concern around an inspection. Although many already have amalgam separators installed and were well prepared in doing so prior to the July deadline, there is that one additional deadline that we're finding some are still unaware of, and that pertains to your one-time compliance report that was required to be submitted by October 12th of this year. So simply installing an amalgam separator isn't enough. We're going to spend a little time here because there are some important details you need to know about your report. For those of you just existing offices, you had until October 12th, as I said, to submit it. But if you're in a transference of ownership situation, you'll have 90 days in which to get a new report submitted once that ownership does take place, or the transfer does take place. New offices, meaning those that were established after July 14th of 2017, you have to submit your report within 90 days following the introduction of wastewater into a municipal source. Now, what if you had an amalgam separator installed prior to the rule going into effect on July 14th of 2017? The rule allows dental dischargers that had installed and were using an amalgam separator prior to June 14th of 2017 to continue to use it until June 14th of 2027 if it's functioning properly, is ISO 1143 certified, and doesn't need to be replaced. In this case, you would fall under the grandfathering provision, but in order to be grandfathered under the rule, you'll still need to check with your manufacturer for proof that your separator is in fact certified, and make sure you get documentation of that. It's also part of your required record keeping. You still have to submit a one-time compliance report in order to certify that you're in compliance. So you'll have that report to submit no matter what, if you're an existing office or a new office.
So the question is, who is your control authority and where do you submit your one-time compliance report? It's going to be one or more of 3 places, depending on where you live. Either your local wastewater utility, start here if you already know who yours is, your state environmental agency, and or the US EPA office. Since we're speaking right now to an audience that spans all across the United States, and that who do you confirm with will vary greatly, we'll provide links to help you locate your agencies in the resources section at the end of our discussion. So the next thing that you're going to need to be in compliance is to make sure that you have an amalgam bucket. Even if your office is considered amalgam free and you're only placing composites, you're still working on patients that have amalgam in their mouths. No, amalgam can't be stored in a Tupperware on the counter. Amalgam waste does have to be stored in a bucket that is labeled as a wide mouth bucket that is labeled non-contact amalgam waste for recycling. Amalgam waste doesn't just come from teeth removals or fillings. The most common places that it's coming from are chairside traps and your vacuum traps, as well as those spent amalgam capsules, extracted teeth, contact, non-contact amalgam. Really anything that touched amalgam that isn't going through your suction lines has to be disposed of properly. Amalgam can never be disposed of in the trash or with your biohazards. These buckets have specific requirements by the ADA. A few things to think about too. It must be sent for recycling when it's full or at a year, whichever comes first. It cannot be placed on a carpet. It does need to be a wide mouth container that's clearly marked. We strongly recommend getting a complete program for recycling and disposal setup like the one offered by Solmedics that takes care of those supplies, shipping and recycling, and provides timely certificates that you're required to maintain your records. It's required that you have one bucket in your office at a minimum.
So step 3 has to do with your vacuum lines. Vacuum lines must never be cleaned with oxidizing or acidic cleaners like bleach, peroxide, chlorine, iodine, or any cleaner with a pH lower than 6 or greater than 8. So you'll need to stock plenty of vacuum line cleaner with a neutral pH between 6 and 8. In order to protect your health of your patients, it's absolutely recommended that your lines be cleaned daily. Given the current COVID-19 landscape, though, many municipalities and states have implemented guidelines on the cleaning of vacuum lines with an appropriate cleaner after every patient. So please make sure to check with your agency to be sure.
Make sure to keep all of your records handy, both physically and electronically, so they're readily available for inspection should that occur. It's always good to have a copy of your records up at the front desk in the event you get a pop-up inspection. A good electronic option that provides quick access to your compliance documents is offered also by Solmedics. Gaining that fast access to your records will go a long way to prevent hefty fines and potential closures simply by staying organized. And it reduces the amount of time that an inspector needs to spend in the practice just peeking around.
So your records need to be complete, and they should include manuals, installation records, waste management and recycling documentation, inspection records, certificates of compliance, and repair records. And keep in mind that you only have a 10-day window to complete repairs if they're needed.
So in summary, the 4 things that you need to accomplish to be in compliance are: install an amalgam separator and file your one-time compliance report, get an amalgam bucket, get and use a neutral pH line cleaner for your vacuum lines, and get and keep your records in order.
All right, at the beginning of the presentation, we promised to provide a list of resources for everything that we covered here today. And all the information can be found by following these links, which we'll provide to you a bit later as well. To make sure you have all this information handy, everyone will be provided with a downloadable compliance resource kit via email that will include the links and points we covered here today, as well as details on what that complete solution we recommended looks like. Megan, you want to take some questions from our audience?
I'd love to.
All right. I see a couple coming in here. All right, the first one is, I was closed during COVID-19. Do I have extra time to comply?
No, there was never an extension for offices. You'll still need to comply with the regulation components, maintain your system per the manufacturer's guidelines. And an example is, Solmedics containers are changed at minimum every 12 months or at the full line, whichever comes first. So you'll need to change those according to the manufacturer's guidelines.
Okay. All right, here's another one. I never place amalgam. Do I really need this?
We get this question a lot. Even if your office is composite only, you're still working on patients that have amalgam in their mouths. So you will need to comply with the regulation. Your chairside traps and vacuum traps still need to be disposed of in an amalgam bucket as well.
All right, I'm trying to read this one. And this one relates to that. I'm exempt under the rule. Do I still have to have an amalgam bucket?
Vacuum traps and chairside traps can still contain trace amalgam, so a bucket is a perfect solution to disposal. Always check with your local authority, as local governance and municipalities can have tighter regulations.
Okay. Oh, how many chairs can be serviced by one unit?
Your amalgam separator must fit your practice. The Solmedics NXT comes in various sizes to fit any practice. Our standard system accommodates up to 10 chairs. We have a mini system that's designed for those smaller practices that have tight spaces, up to 4 chairs. In larger practices, we have solutions for them as well. Our high volume system was designed for institutions and schools for up to 20 chairs per system. All of our systems can be placed in tandem, so you can accommodate more chairs. We have dedicated account managers that can certainly guide you through the right fit for your office and make sure that you're in compliance.
All right. Do I have to have a service contract for my separator?
No, you do not. We do not believe in contracts here.
Okay. Let's see. I've had a lot of staff turnover. How do I know if I'm still compliant?
Oh, this is a good one, especially with everything going on in the country right now. It's very common. This is a great time for your office to take a pause, recheck that you have everything you need. Take a walk around the office, check to see if you have your amalgam separator, check to see if your container, the last date you recycled it, check to make sure you have an amalgam bucket and that has been recycled and is current. If you have any questions about any of these things, you can certainly call Solmedics. We can look into your account and see what you, when you last recycled, to make sure that you have everything you need and that you're protected. I also highly recommend checking for your line cleaners on your safety data sheets to make sure that that pH meets the criteria that the regulation states.
And can you go through, this one's kind of a combination of a couple of questions. They're asking about initial costs and annual costs.
Sure. So the initial cost would be the setup of your system. By purchasing the NXT amalgam separator, it is coming with everything that you need to get started. It's coming with the mounting bracket, the mounting hardware, the air water separator, collection container, your first collection container, and your amalgam bucket for a suggested retail cost of $860. You purchase that through your dealer. So if you have discounts or incentives, that price can vary. Also, if you're using Solmetics right now, if you're purchasing, we do have a Q4 promotion that will even include a case of Power Scrub line cleaner for you to get you started. So you'll have everything that you need to meet that regulation. The annual cost depends, it can vary on your practice and how frequently you need to change your collection containers. Our system is designed so that you don't have to have that additional cost of having a tech come in to change that container. Our containers suggested retail are $338. Again, if you have discounts or incentives with your dealer, those can be applied.
Okay, the next one, I know, Sam, you're asking, I have an amalgam separator that was updated recently by my tech from Solmetics. Does this mean I'm in compliance? That's a good one for you, Megan.
Yes, if you have an NXT separator or one of our Solmetics separators or legacies, you are in compliance as long as you are changing those containers when it's full or at a year, whichever comes first.
Okay, all right, this one anonymous, but does the full extracted tooth go in it if it has amalgam in it?
It goes in the amalgam bucket.
Yeah. This one, our amalgam separator was in place when I purchased a practice 2 years ago. How do I know if the one-time compliance report was submitted? And if it was not submitted, what do I do?
You can contact Solmetics and we can help you with that.
Endodontic offices use hypochlorite for irrigation, so bleach solution. How does that impact suction lines of maintaining a neutral pH? Because obviously that's not neutral.
Correct. You should not be using bleach to be cleaning your lines. That does not meet the regulation. The pH is required to be between 6 and 8.
Yeah, so not as a line cleaner, but they're using it for irrigation. So that's a little bit different. So we might want to get back with a different, a little bit different information on that if they're using it for irrigation like many endodontic practices do. Will this webinar be available after today?
Yes, it will be.
Okay, I'm not sure if I did a compliance report. How would I send that and to who?
The compliance report, you're going to be sending that to your local authority. You can also check with Solmetics customer service. We can help you to fill those compliance reports out and make sure you're sending them to the correct location.
Okay. Kimberly, you're asking who was supposed to tell us about the one-time compliance report. Is there a fee if it hasn't been submitted?
I'm not familiar with the fee that might go into that. Again, you can call our customer service who deals with those reports on a regular basis.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a fee if there is one or not, but I would definitely get that submitted right away. Do we have time for a couple of more questions? What if I have had a Solmetics amalgam separator for years, changing the cartridge every year? How do I know if and when or who may have filed the initial compliance report?
You'd want to check with your office staff. You can also call Solmetics customer service and we can help you with that.
Okay. And I have one more here from Brian. Is using your Power Scrub vacuum line cleaner going to make my containers last longer?
Using the Power Scrub line cleaner is going to help make the efficiency of those containers a little bit better. You're not going to get a lifetime out of them, but it is, because it's an enzymatic cleaner, it's going to help to compact that material in there for a little bit better usage.
My amalgam separator was installed in 2013. Am I compliant?
You're going to want to check your Solmetics amalgam separator or what separator you have and check with your local authority.
Okay. And someone's asking if there are discounts through their state dental association.
We do partner with many of our dental affiliates. You can check, we have links to those on our website. So you can go direct to your local dental association, and some of them have containers or discounts. So definitely check that out for sure.
All right. I think, let me see if we have any more. Someone asking if there's a penalty for not being compliant. Obviously, if you're inspected and not compliant, for sure, but I think we talked a little bit about that. Megan, do you want to add to it?
Sure. By not staying in compliance, you are risking your practice of hefty fines and some shutdowns. We do hear them, and the inspectors are out and they are looking. So just make sure you protect yourself and protect your practice. It's cheaper to do the right things than to get the fines.
Okay, that's right. And Kimberly is asking, if we submit for the yearly compliance, does that cover the one-time report? Kimberly, I'm not sure if you submitted a one-time compliance report, then yeah, you're covered. But is there anything else you want to add there, Megan?
They should still be submitting that one-time compliance report and keeping that documentation of their recycling.
Yeah, and if it's a specialty practice, you only have to submit it once, of course.
And I do recommend always checking with your local dental association to make sure that you're meeting your requirements in that area. There's so many areas of this country that they have tightened up the requirements. So you want to make sure that you're abiding by your state and your local municipalities' regulations.
Okay. Peter is asking, I bought a deal of buy 2 replacement cartridges. How do I tell the regulator that I have a replacement cartridge next year? I'm not certain I understand the question, but as long as, Megan, do you want to add about replacement cartridges?
Sure, you can have replacement cartridges. Actually, we recommend, it's always a good habit to have an extra container on hand just in case you get a pop-up visit and you're getting close to that line. You can change that off and have a really nice fresh system for when your inspector comes. You can keep those extra containers. What they're looking for is to make sure that you are recycling on a yearly basis. They're not worried about extra containers unless they're dirty in your office. You can't leave those sitting in your office.
Okay. We have time for one more. We want to be respectful of everybody's lunch hour here. How do I get the resources you mentioned earlier?
We are going to be emailing those out to everyone after this luncheon hour, and they'll be available for you.
All right. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us live here today. We know that shutdowns and fines can have a tremendous impact on your livelihood. So we tried to tailor the information we shared today with that in mind. Our goal is to get and keep you fully compliant, get you prepared for an inspection, and keep your doors open, all while protecting the environment and your health. Watch your email for the downloadable compliance resource kit from our friends at Solmedics, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you for taking the time, everyone.
Thank you.